can hear me good. Okay, Rabbi Yossi, this is the second shiur on Chukas, Azeis Chukas, right? Yesterday we mostly reviewed the previous Maimed. That's what we did. Okay, now Shnei Chaim. There's such a arichas here. There's so many words. It's 3 Maimorim of arichas, 2 Maimorim for sure. And I'm telling you how I understand it. Okay, if I understand it wrong, I'm understanding it very wrong. But if I'm understanding it wrong, I don't know what the right pshat is. Okay, the nekuda of the whole arichas is that we're explaining the tzimtzum of Eses Sfiris compared to Eses Sfiris Agenuzis, right? The chiddush of this maimed, the chiddush of this hemshech, is that there's Eses Sfiris lifnei tzimtzum. Then we have this mashmos of the Eitz Chaim, which is going to cause us a lot of trouble for a long time. That the Eses Sfiris lifnei tzimtzum, the Gabi Eses Sfiris la'achar tzimtzum is only miut. It's not shina emos, it's not eschachos. But there is miut, there's tzimtzum, there's miut. And in the last Maimed, he gave us 2 points of that miut. Number one, when the Eses Sfiras are together, they have more oil because of one another. And number two, when the Eses Sfiras are called about Smusei, there is the Rav who sees the picture of the whole Seichel, which the Rebbe Rashab explained on the bottom of page Nun Aleph is the Kavanah. The way the Eses Sfiras are included, Lifnei Tzimtzum, there's the feeling of the purpose of the Eses Sfiras. So the last Maimed told us 2 shinuyim, 2 tzimtzumim that happens as a Sfiras Agenuzis as they come after the tzimtzum. Because they come one at a time, there's less oyer. And because when they come after the tzimtzum, they have yet to fulfill their purpose, they lose the oyer which is connected to the kavanah. Our Maimed is a third nekuda, and they're so edel, and you really wonder why the Rebbe Rashab is a zoyne geya to bring out every prat. Okay, what he's doing basically is giving us a third tzimtzum. What is that third idea? So he calls it Oir ha'oila al kulana, the very last line on page Nundalit. It's from Shara Yichud V'Muneh Perikid Beis. Oir ha'oila al kulana. Okay? And then he also calls it Chayes Kloli. They're both on the last line on Nun Dalad. Eira Eila Al Kulana and Chayes Kloli. On top of page Nun Hey, he calls them Koyach Hatzirov. Machabarton u'mitzarafton yachad. So Tzimtzum Arishin affects that the Sfiras Agenuzos Lifnei Tzimtzum come in a way of miut and more gilui, but not Shin HaMahuz after the Tzimtzum. 1 Sfira at a time. Number one, it's missing the oil of all 10 Sfiras together. Number two, it's missing the oil which has to do with the Kavanah as it exists in a state of Koyach. And number three, it's missing the Eira El Al Kulana. The Eira Keach Hatziruf. And Keach Hatziruf is called the Eira El Al Kulana and Chayes Koli. Now before we go weiter, I want you to turn to page Nun Vav. Look at the last 2 lines of the Pedic. First paragraph of page Nun Vav. He tells you that these 2 expressions, Oira Oila Al Kulana and Chayes Kloli, are 2 madreges. It's a segrayim. V'yesh leimar, the Koyach Elyon, Oira Eila Al Kulana is Keach Nelem, v'hu atzmi shel Oir Pnimi. And then the line after that it says, V'chayes Kloli hu Eira Mizgala v'hu Eira Makif. That this Oir, that our Maimed is talking about, really has 2 madreges. The higher madrega in that oir is called Eira Eila Al Kulana. And look at the last words. V'yesh leima shedau bechinas yechida v'chaya. Eira Eila Al Kulana is the madrega of yechida, and the Chayes Kloli is the madrega of chaya. Both of these in Yonim are included in this concept which is called Koyach Hatziruf. That the way the Eses Sfiras Agenuzis exists Lifnei Tzimtzum, there is a Koyach Hatziruf, which is an Eira Eila Al Kulani and a Chayes Kloli. When the Tzimtzum Arishan happens, in addition to the first 2 miutim of Eses Sfiras we learned about in the previous Maimed, we have another one. That the Keach Hatziruf goes away, the Eira Al Kulana goes away, the Chayes Kloli goes away. Okay? Now, our job is to understand a little bit, yeah? Understand a little bit. So before I go into this business of Achei Chassidus, I want to give you an opportunity to speak. If something is on your mind, please go ahead and speak. We're good, yeah? We're good or we're bad, but without nothing to say, okay? Okay. I suppose the source of what I'm about to tell you is in Igeres HaKedesh Siman Hey, Vayaz David Shem. Although over there there's not all the pratim bepashtus, but at least b'klolos you have these ideas, okay? Let me start with the following. One of the gifts that the Eibishter gave people for free is that they could speak. Like it says in Targum on the Pasuk, Vahi Adu Nefesh Chaya, says the Targum L'Ruach Memalal, that people could speak. Right? In the Sfarim we're called Deim Tzmei Achai Medaber, and in V'kocha from the Rebbe Marash, he gives two definitions of Medaber. One of them is intelligent, Seichel, and the other is the ability to create words. Chassidus argues that speaking is extremely difficult. That the truth of the matter is that every time you want to make a sentence, you should have to concentrate on the arrangement of the words into sentences and the sentences into paragraph. It should take so much effort to speak that it should almost not be worthwhile. Like when an animal speaks. Every time you speak, words come out. And the words carry ideas. But you don't think about the word, you think about ideas. The words tumble out of your mouth almost without thinking about it. Now, if you're a teacher, and you have to speak to students, and the students are on a lower level, so you have to be careful how you choose words. And the students shouldn't be overwhelmed, the students should be able to understand v'chuli. But one of the things about dibur is that the way the Eibishter made us speak, we don't think about speaking. The dogma for this is people could walk or dance, right? Dancing takes concentration, even if you do the same dance 1,000 times. Walking, you have to learn how to walk. Oh, you don't know how to learn. You don't know how to walk. You don't know how to walk. Once you learn to walk, you don't think about it. And the same is true with writing, right? To draw always takes focus. To write, once you learn how to write, you don't think about it. And the same is true in the audio sense. If you're singing, every time you sing, you have to focus again on the shir. Otherwise, the makshiv, the shemeya, will see that you're doing it not with the right kavanah. There'll be a chasaron and the negina. But once a person learns to speak, the words tumble out of him with little effort. And it's something which you can observe. You watch kids who are around 2 years old. When the kids are learning to speak, it's a fascinating thing to watch. 2 months before, they barely said a word. 6 months later, they speak coherently. In between those two mamadim and matzavim, they go through a period of time where they chatter nonstop. Every word they hear, they repeat until they make a challenge out of it. You say apple, they say apple, and somehow apple ends up being potato salad. They just use the sounds. What they're doing is they're practicing their vocal cords to join together the different consonants, the different sounds to create words, because it's new to them. Once they learn how to speak, they stop doing it. But for a meshach zman, for a month or 2 or 3, they just repeat. They're learning to speak. Once they learn to speak, speech happens altogether, automatic. In Chassidus it's written, it says in Samachei and Shvuas, there's 4 madregas of seichel. The lowest madrega of seichel is mechanical seichel, what the biologists, what the evolutionists call tool use, using tools. That's the lowest madrega of seichel. This you can find by some higher primates, by some mammals. The second madrega of seichel is seichel that has to do with mides, what you and I would call psychology, to understand emotions. The third madrega of seichel is the ability to create words. Creating words is considered more difficult than understanding emotions, understanding politics. And the highest madrega of seichel is abstract reasoning, understanding philosophy, where everything comes from and why everything is, and what's the point of everything. Because if you think about it, you build a house, yeah? You have to place a brick on top of a brick on top of a brick. They all have to be placed very neatly and very orderly, and you have to make sure that they're in a straight line, otherwise the wall is not going to stand. There's a lot of concentration to building a house. And it's made up of many stones. If you build a house 100 times, you still have to concentrate. Words are buildings. They're made up of oisius, of stones, that create composites, which are words. And the words join together into larger and larger composites, which are called sentences and paragraphs and sections and so on. And every time you speak, you're creating something new. Every time you open your mouth, I'm talking to you, yeah? Let's say this share that I'm giving you, I've given many times before. Am I repeating it word for word like I did last time? Of course not. Why? Because we take words for granted. The way the Eibishter gave us the Keach HaDibur is we speak effortlessly. Azeh the Eibish Bashafen. The trademark of a human being, al pi Torah, is that he's a medaber. And this is something which biologists cannot deny. As much as they try to say that human beings are not much different than animals, but the fact of the matter is animals cannot speak. Animals can communicate, but they can't speak. Animals could use words as ideas. An apple is an idea. Walking is an idea. People construct sentences. You know how they study it in English. You have the predicate, and you have the noun, and you have the verb, and you have the adverb. Every single word in the sentence has a different taich, has a different purpose within the framework of that sentence. And you don't even think about it. They tumble out of your mouth effortlessly. When you speak, you're really thinking about what you're trying to say. You don't think about the fact that you're speaking words. And the Chassidus considers that a pella, a nes. In other words, the difficulty in speech is not the ideas. The difficulty in speech is pashut creating the words. It's a building. And every time you speak, you're creating new buildings. But the Eibishter gifted it to us. The Eibishter made that speech should happen automatically. That's what makes us a medaber. If a chimpanzee wants to speak, maybe you could. But for a chimpanzee to say one sentence will take an hour. Not because he's less intelligent, but because he has to put the sounds together into the word. That takes time. The words together into the sentence. That takes time. People don't even think about it. Once a child is a toddler, once he learns to speak, it's a matana that the Eibishter gave human beings that are called medaber chinam, that you speak without thinking. Healthy people, when they talk, think about what they're trying to say, not about the fact that they're saying it. They think about the seichel and the svara and not the yoisis. It's a gift. It's a free gift that the Eibishter gave people. And so Chassidus wants you to know that the fact that it's a gift doesn't make it small. In other words, we have a tendency to take for granted what comes to us easy. So we automatically assume that speech is no big deal, because once a child turns 2 years old, he speaks effortlessly. Chassidus says, don't do that. Chassidus says, you should know that the Keach HaDibur is a Keach Nifla. The Chochma of Dibur is a Chochma of Binyan. It's even higher than the Chochma of Midas. And yet we do it without thinking about it, because the Eibishter gave it to us as a matnas chinam. That's how you have to understand the Inyan HaDibur. It's a gift from the Eibishter. Human beings can speak. And it's one of those things that even evolutionists, with all of their religious need for apokursis and kfira, cannot deny. They cannot deny that there are certain things that you see in the world that you cannot explain bepashtus, that the Eibishter created it. Another example of that is the very fact that people walk upright. Bipedalism is biologically not logical. It doesn't make sense. The amount of energy and effort and brain power it takes to balance your body when you're so far off the ground makes it not worthwhile. The reason we're bipedal is because we're bedugma shel maila. And basically the biologists come up with all kinds of explanations of how it could be based on evolution, and it's really very pathetic. And speech is another example. Human beings' ability to speak so effortlessly doesn't make the phenomenon of speech simply vaharaya orangutans and chimpanzees that have exactly the same vocal cords as we do cannot do it. Because the chokhmah of dibur is a very deep chokhmah, and the Eibishter did not give them that chokhmah. The Eibishter gave us that chokhmah the kind of way that it's memela. You don't even have to pay attention. It happens by itself. This is the foundational idea. The dibur happens by people nicht trachten dekeret. Now, when a person speaks, there are a few parts to the speech, okay? There's what he's saying. I'm giving you a shira now. I'm speaking in Inside Chassidus with you. So that's the oyer, that's the seichel, that's the higoyen, right? You learn a maimer, you analyze the maimer, you study the maimer, review the maimer, you teach the maimer, you want to understand the maimer. That seichel and svara of that maimer is the oyer of the speech. Believe it or not, that's the lowest madrege. The lowest aspect of speech is the idea. If you're looking in the maimer, he calls it bina. If you look on page Nun Hey, the line that begins with the word bo, it says Keach HaMetzad v'Keach HaChochma. I'm talking about that soon. Ve'er HaMislabesh Humibino. The seichel that you're talking about, or the midas that you're talking about, or the chushim that you're talking about, or the varam gashmim, the oyer ha-seichel that you're speaking is the lowest madrege. Comes from bina. What's the highest madrege? The highest madrege are the oisias themselves, the letters themselves. And earlier this year we just spoke about oisias barichas gedola. And I explained to you when we learned that oisias come from atzmas. Oisias are daimim. Oisias do not have babies. Oisias do not divide. Oisias do not coalesce. Every kind of ois is mushish and atzmus and hus kimaimer. Hanefesh maleya oisias. And each ois and each madrege of oisias exists in etzam hanefesh. With bligvul oisias, each one is completely separate from every other. And according to Chassidus, oisias, letters, come straight from atzmas. The sounds that we make to carry the ideas that we communicate, those oisias are called avonim. They're called stones. They're called, they're called avonim. Doimim, and the shadish is atzmus amus. It's very similar to what you learn in Chassidus, that oyer is relating to mo'er, and kalim is relating to atzmus, which is higher than mo'er. And the nefesh ha'adam, eir ha'seichel, is relating to the giluyim of the nefesh, and the letters, the sounds, oisias, amushish, and atzmus ha'nefesh. Those are the two extremes. The seichel comes from bino. The idea that I'm sharing, whether it's a seichel or it's a midah or it's a chush, comes from the developed mind, from a gilu oir pnimi, for lack of words. And the oisias come from atzmas. But there's a third thing in between those two. And the third thing in between those two, in the Igeres HaKedesh Siman Hey, he speaks about it in a number of pratim. I'm not going to discuss all the pratim because they're not all negeh to us. One of the pratim of the middle stage is what's called Keach HaTziruf. Keach HaTziruf means, if when I'm speaking, my ideas come from bina, and the oisias carrying that idea come from atzmas and nefesh, the koyach that brings those oisias together to create the words, and brings those words together to create the sentences, and bring those sentences together to create the paragraphs, and the paragraphs together to create the speech or the section, it's called Keach HaTziruf. Keach HaTziruf means the chokhmah of putting letters together into words, the chokhmah of putting words together into sentences, and so on. And according to Chassidus, Keach HaTziruf is chokhmah, or even keser, kadmas haseichel. The stones themselves come from atzmos. The koyach that brings the stones together comes from chokhmah. The idea that those stones that are put together into words and sentences and paragraphs are going to carry comes from bina. And of course, the weird thing about it is, the only thing we focus on is the lowest. When a person gives a shira, he thinks about what he wants to say. He doesn't think about how it's going to come out, where the word's going to come from, how will the sounds and the can be put together into words, and the words put together into sentences, and the sentences put together into sections. It happens b'meila. Why? It's a matana from the Eibishter, not because it's easy. It's a matana from the Eibishter that this incredibly deep chokhmah happens by people below the ice without us knowing about it. Otherwise, it would be impossible to speak. If a person had to concentrate not just on what he's saying, but how he says it, to say one sentence would take 20 minutes. It wouldn't be worth it. But there's a huge chokhmah. It's the chokhmah of putting together sounds into words and words into sentences and so on. Now, of course, the thing about this chokhmah is you could say the same thing 10 times. And each time you say it a little different. In other words, the seichel and the svar is the same. The oisias that speak it. And the koyach hatzira that puts those oisias together to create individual words and individual sentences, individual paragraphs and so on. Each time it's said is a little bit different. And yet it's so effortless. That's the gift of dibur. The gift of dibur is the oisias and atzmas hanefesh. And the gift of dibur is that when people speak, they automatically put together the sounds into words and the words into sentences into paragraphs without any attention whatsoever. Not because it's easy, not because it's simple, but because it's a matana. And the truth is that matana is coming from chokhmah shebenefesh or even higher. It's called kechatziruf. So we have a dilemma. Our dilemma is that we are explaining an idea that we don't pay attention to because in our lives it happens without any attention. And the Maimer wants us to appreciate the Goydel HaChochmah Shabbat. Every single time a person opens his mouth, he's creating something new. Even if the Svara is the same, you never say it exactly the same way twice. And the way you say it each time is creating new binyan. A binyan of words, a binyan of sentences, a binyan of paragraphs. And you don't see the Chochmah Shabbatova, but it happens b'meila. But be'emes is it's coming from the leg of Chochmah, which is from the part of the subconscious. It's coming from Seichel, from Chochmah, and from Kadmas HaSeichel, from the Makifim Shabbanefesh. It's called Kechatziruf. So the Rebbe Rashab says, and the Alter Rebbe says it in Tanya, I want you to be mizboinen in something that you don't want to be mizboinen in. I want you to imagine that speech would be as hard as it would really need to be. I'll be saying. And appreciate the easiest part of the seichel is the svara that you want to say. The hardest part of the seichel is extracting from etzam hanefesh those stones, those oisias which are going to carry it. And in between those two is the ability to put those stones together to create the words and the sentences that are going to carry the idea, which is called ke'echatzirif. And appreciate how deep a chokhmah it is, even though the way the Eibishter made it, this chokhmah comes to us without us even realizing that there's a chokhmah there. It's called ke'echatzirif. Okay? Questions or comments? Questions or comments? We're good. Hey, all is good. Yeah, if you're good, we're going to go.
Levels you had Chachma, Bina, and Atmos, right?
Right, so it's either Chochma or Keser. It's Pnimius HaChochma. Ke'er Chatziruf is not the Seichel of Chochma, it's the instinct of Chochma. It's coming from the Nefesh, from the top down. You don't even, it just happens. There's a great Chochma there, but you're not deliberating it. It's tumbling out of your Nefesh. Right, so the three in Yonim would be Bina, Chochma, or what's called Kadmos HaSeichel, and then Atzmos. The Eisis come from Atzmos Mamish, correct. Which means every time you speak words, you're creating Eisis Yesh Mayayah. Pardon me?
The Indian Seichel, the only thing we have to think about is from which one?
That's correct. And it's the lowest part of the communication exercise. It's the part that we could focus on. So the Eibush makes us do it. All the more difficult stuff, if we had to focus on creating Eisis, if we had to focus on creating Tziruf, we would never be able to speak. So he gave it to us Matane. We have to work on the...
Bina.
Which is Bina, correct. Which is Bina, correct, right. And I showed it to you inside. So basically what you have is, there is a very, very deep chokhmah in the nefesh, that every time it speaks creates new forms. And the Eibishter made this chokhmah to be what we call in the modern world subconscious. It happens automatically. There's a great chokhmah involved in creating words and creating sentences. And the Eibishter made it that our neshama should produce them without any deliberate and conscious effort. It's just tumble out of the nefesh by itself. So the Rebbe Rashab says the fact that it tumbles out of the nefesh by itself doesn't mean it's not a chokhmah. It just means it's a chokhmah the Eibishter gave us by matana, but there's an enormous chokhmah. In fact, Achei Chassidus, the chokhmah of Ke'er Chatziruf is considered higher than the chokhmah of Ke'er Chassidus. So you have to appreciate the process, okay? The idea that sounds, oisius, are put together to make words, and the words are put together to make sentences, and the sentences are put together to make paragraphs, is a huge chokhmah. But the chokhmah comes from our neshama in the kind of way that it's there's no effort, there's no struggle, there's no work, there's no correction. It just happens. Why? Because the neshama gives it out automatically. The way the neshama is, it produces the sounds and the words and the sentences and the paragraphs. In other words, the neshama itself is speaking. Now the neshama is a big chocham, but the neshama is not part of the brain. It's not part of the deliberate person. It's not part of the goof. It's not part of me. It's not part of my ego. It's part of my subconscious. The neshama uses its seichel to produce the words and the sentences and the paragraphs. Memela mitzad the seichel of the neshama, as the neshama is removed from the goof. You don't have to do it; it happens automatically. So if you say the same ma'amah 10 times, and every time you say it a little bit different, that means the seichel of your neshama, the seichel of your subconscious, decided on Sunday to say it like this, and Monday to say it like this, and Tuesday to say it like this, and to this group of bacham to say it like that, and to a different bacham say it like this. Why? Why did the neshama decide that? We don't know, but there's a reason. But that reason is part of the helam of the neshama. Just like the neshama itself is behelam, the koyach hatziruf, which explains why you'll say the same exact idea, and each time you say it a little bit differently. The neshama knows why. To Reuven had to say it like this, to Shimon had to say it like this, and to Levi to say it like this. You don't know why. The neshama does. Because just like the koyach hatziruf emerges from the nefesh automatically, the tzirufim emerge from the nefesh automatically. The way the words come out is automatic from the nefesh. If you look inside, on page Nun Hey, the line that begins with the word umuvda, which is 8 lines into the page. I'll just read a little bit, okay? Kol oir seichel mislavish be'esius. Every idea has to be carried by words, right? Just like light, you can't see it without a reflector. Seichel cannot be revealed without words. But eine mochrach shir be'esius elu davka. It doesn't have to be in one set of words. It's not like there's a set of words for this seichel and a set of words for this seichel, because Yochali is gam be'es Achei Temimim. The ideas can be said in many different ways, using different words. For example, calling the Eibush to the master of the world, says the Rebbe had a inyan zeh yochel lo v'gam be'es Achei Temimim. There's so many different ways you could articulate that the Eibush is the master of the world. It's not necessarily Adein Elam. Adein Elam is one way. The koyach hatziruf will give out that idea. Tomorrow will say the same idea. I'll use the words melech ha'olam, and the death in a different form. Because although there's a great chokhmah, the koyach hatziruf, none of it happens deliberately and consciously. It all happens passively and subconsciously. V'imkein, therefore, lei mitad ha'teichel atzmei hutzrich liyas melubish be'ez ha'el dafka. Not because of the conscious seichel, the bina part of the seichel. The part of the seichel that I taka understand, the part of the seichel that I'm able to communicate, the part of the seichel where I have to work to teach it, it doesn't necessarily require one set of words. I can say the same idea in many words. We find different chachamim. They can say exactly the same thing, and each one uses different names. For example, Tesis Rosh Varan. There's a Rebbe, order from the Rebbe in Tafshin Tes, where the Rebbe brings that when the Rabbeim bring Rishonim, sometimes they bring Tesis Rosh Varan, sometimes they bring Rashi, Rambam, Rif. And the Rebbe explains that depends what kind of idea we're dealing with. If we're dealing with halacha, they bring Rambam and the Rif. If we're dealing with Svara, they bring Tesis Rosh Varan. They're saying exactly the same idea, they different words. Why? There's a reason. But the reason has to do with the neshama. It has nothing to do with the consciousness of the person. It's called Koyach hatziruf. Okay? At the end of the line, it says, Rak mitzad keach ha-mitzaref. There's a power to fuse sounds into words and words into sentences. Shu mitzaref u-mechaber. The word tziruf means to purify and to join together, and binds eisius, the letters into words and the words into sentences. U-malbush behem as-haseichel. And then the idea is added to those words. Says the Rebbe Shazehu, the power of tziruf, of joining together the sounds into words and the words into sentences, is keach al yesem miguf seichel. There's a higher seichel than the seichel itself. Ha'malubish ba'oisis, which is put into the words. What the Rebbe is showing us is that the Eibishter gave us things b'matana, not because they're easy, but because they're actually too hard for us to do. The part that we could do, we have to on our own, which is mechadish chadushim and seichel. The part that's too hard, which is to find the words and to find the tziruf, to communicate that idea, because it's impossible for us to do, it happens memela. But don't make it into something small, because it happens automatically. It's a big pillar, the keach tziruf. Now, but then it's testament, it happens automatically. And then the Rebbe goes on to speak why little children cannot speak. And the Rebbe says further, not only little children cannot speak, sometimes even big chachamim cannot speak. Sometimes big chachamim cannot speak because they don't have words. And sometimes big chachamim cannot speak because even if they have words, because they don't have the keach hatziruf, they don't have the chochmah of joining those sounds together into words and into sentences, into paragraphs to communicate. So keach hatziruf is a deep chochmah. It's only that this deep chochmah happens memel. So if I ask you, why are you teaching this sugya, whatever sugya it is, why are you teaching Hilchos Shviyos? So you tell me because that's what we're learning in Rambam. Yeah? Why? Because I like Hilchos Shviyos. But if I ask you, why are you saying it in these words, I can't answer that question. Not because there isn't an answer, because I don't know it. Because the place in the nefesh which made the choice how to speak these ideas is part of my subconscious. But it's a part of the process of communication. This is called koyach hatziruf. So the atzmistic idea of speech is the sounds themselves, the avonim, the daimim themselves, which we're really not talking about. The mispashet, the gile idea of the ideas, is the seichel and svara, which I have to develop and I have to understand and I have to analyze it and I have to explain it. And in between those two, there's the keach hatziruf. Keach hatziruf is not the sounds themselves; it's the arrangements of the sounds into the what's called in the Sefer Yetzirah batim, vestach. Beis avona b'nus beis batim, and then you have many words and make sentences, and then you have paragraphs and so on. All this happens with derech mel keach hatziruf. So keach hatziruf is one of those phenomena which all of us know and none of us pay attention to, and the Rebbe wants us to understand that there's a moed nike chiddush b'davar. But there's two aspects of the keach hatziruf, just like there's two aspects to oisius, which is how we finished yesterday's shir. Although, by the way, at this point, I'm not sure if I was correct yesterday, but I'm going to go with it again. The oisius themselves are doimim. In the oisius, there's oir. So the koyach hatziruf has two aspects. The oisius hack to the koyach hatziruf, how the oisius have to be put together, and how the putting together of oisius has seichel in it. The seichel aspect of the koyach hatziruf is closer to the seichel. The oisius aspect of koyach hatziruf is closer to the etzem nefesh. But the koyach hatziruf, which puts together words, is putting together words for the sake of an idea. So there's the koyach hatziruf mitzad the words, and there's the koyach hatziruf mitzad the fact that the words are carrying ideas. The koyach hatziruf, which has to do with the fact that the words are carrying ideas, is lower than the koyach hatziruf, which has to do with oisius themselves, because oisius themselves comes from etzem nefesh. In other words, we're sort of splitting koyach hatziruf into two parts. One is that's closer to the oisius, and one that's closer to the seichel. Now, in Tanya, Achei Temimim Perikid Beis, the Alter Rebbe is talking about Asar Mamoros, correct? Perikid Aleph and Perikid Beis of the Shara Achei Temimim are about Asar Mamoros. And if you learn Tanya, you'll see that the Alter Rebbe makes the argument that the Asar Mamoros create the world from the chayes of the oisius themselves, not because the oisius of Asar Mamoros are carrying seichel svara oiroliki. The words themselves have a godliness. So when the Alter Rebbe in Tanya is speaking about keach hatziruf, just like when he spoke about the oisius, he's speaking about the lakus of the oisius themselves. When he's speaking about the keach hatziruf, he's speaking about the keach hatziruf regarding the oisius. But in our Maimon, it's different. Why? Because we're talking about oir, we're not talking about oisius. We're taking a concept from Tanya and applying it to something else. In Tanya, this idea of Keach Hatziruf, Eire El Al Kolona, Chayes Kol is being used to explain how letters come together. The words, the doimim. We are using it, how the letters come together to reveal ideas. Because we're not speaking about Kalim, we're talking about Oyer. Narvaden, what's called Eses Sfiris in it. The Eibush has Eses Sfiris Agenuzis, correct? Right? Eses Sfiris Agenuzis is very different than Sfiris and Ketz. Sfiris and Ketz is called Antochad Lei B'Chushban. There's a whole fancy schmancy business how we understand Sfiris and Ketz, but Sfiris and Ketz are an Achtos. Eses Sfiris Agenuzis are Eser. And Eser is not the pshat, it's less than infinite. It's more than infinite. Because Sfiris and Ketz, infinite Sfiris is really one Oyer. Eser is only Eser. The Eser emerges from where? From the Eibishter. And the Eser emerge together. Eser Sfiris Agnuzis, when they come out of the Eibishter's Kavona and Rotz. Right, the Atzmos of Eidin Seif. And then the Eidin Seif, which is a Madreg of Sfiris and Ketz. And then it comes down to the Madreg of Eser Sfiris Agnuzis. 3 different levels. Those Eser Sfiris emerge together. Those Eser Sfiris emerge together with the Keach Hatziruf. How the Eser Sfiris are joined together has an aid. Just like words, when they emerge from the nefesh, the way they join together as a Keach Hatziruf, the oil of those words, the seichel of those words, has a Keach Hatziruf that joins them together in a certain way. And you need to appreciate how edel this is. We started off the shir with 3 points. The highest point is that Asias come from Atzmus. The lowest point is that Seichel comes from the conscious mind, from Bina. And the middle point is the Keach Hatziruf, which automatically speaks the words that carry the ideas. But you must understand that in Tanya, Keach Hatziruf is closer to the Oisias, because the Sugya is about Oisias. Over here, the Keach Hatziruf is closer to the Seichel, because the Sugya is about the Oyer of the Sfiras, not the Kelim of the Sfiras. So this Sugya of Keach Hatziruf, which has 2 names, Oyer Eil Al Kulona and Chayes Kloli, as it is in this Maimed, is saying like this. The Eibush has a kavana, right? That's the when in doubt, say kavana. Eibush has a kavana. The kavana of the Eibush, there should be a gilu pnimi and kalim, right? What's called pnimi and be'etzem, as we discussed earlier in the year, and we learned it in the first Maimed in the Machon, and the second Maimed in the Nimshal. So as soon as there's there's in of pnimi. In other words, Mamala Kalama does not come from Sevav Kalam. Kav does not come from Eagle. Mamala Kalama comes from the Eibush because it's the kavana. But when Mamalik Kalaman comes to the Kavana, that's in if necessary. In the beginning, the Eser Sfiris emerges one. Then in Tzimtzum Mishnah, they're going to separate. Then in Seder Ishtasos, they're going to rejoin. At the end of Seder Ishtasos, the Kavana is going to re-emerge. When the Eser Sfiris Agenuzis, which exist as Eser and not as Sfiris and Ketz, because of this Kavana, emerge from the Eibishter, the koyach that brings the Eser Sfiris and makes them one is called Keach Hatziruf. That Keach Hatziruf is a very high oyer. But it's an oyer which is relating to oyer, not oyer relating to Keli. And oyer that relates to oyer is lower than oyer that relates to Keli, because Keli Mamusha Shanatzma is higher than oyer. So in this pedic, the Keach Hatziruf is lower than the Sharayicha Zemuna Pedicate Beis Keach Hatziruf. Because in Shariach Nuna Perigid Beis talking about the Oisias by themselves. Here we're talking about how there's a Keach Hatziruf as Sfiras emerge together. So this is the Maskana, Rabbi Yossi. This is the Maskana. Lifnei Hatzimta and Sfiras Agnuzis. Number 1, the Sfiras Agnuzis exist together, so automatically there's more Eir. Number 2, the Sfiras exist Kol Batzmus, if you have also the Kavana, which is another Eir. And number 3, there's the Eira Eil Al Kolana, which is the Gilui Eira Laki that's responsible for the 10 Sfiras being together. And in Tzimtzum Rishon, all these 3 things go away. Number 1, that each Sfira emerges separately, which in the previous Maimer would be Prakim Chav Gimel and Chav Dalet. Number 2, the Eira of the Kavana is lost, which would be Perek Chavei. And number 3, the oil that makes all Eser Sfiras be one, because they're emerging from Atzmos based on that Kavanah. And the Eifin of Keach Hatziruf is lost. And that's what the Rebbe Rashab is going to dedicate the next 2 or 3 prokim to in this Maimer, to explain the nature of this Tzimtzum. It's really just Perek Chavav and Chav Zayin, because Chav Ches is already a Sikum. Chav Ches is a Sikum of the last 2 Maimorim. Now, what would happen if the Rebbe Rashab wouldn't do this? What would happen? We'd lose sleep. Oh, but the Rebbe is Negeya to show you the incredibly edele inyonim of Ein Seif Lifnei HaTzimtzum versus Ein Seif La'achar HaTzimtzum. Even though it's only miyot and not shini hamahus, we're now adding a third aspect of tzimtzum. That the oyer, which was the basis for how the Esses Sfiras emerged together, which is something which we don't understand, is lost in the tzimtzum arishem when each Sfira emerges by itself. And then there is one more point. What I'm doing is I'm sort of splitting Koyach HaTzirif into 2 sugyas, yeah? The Koyach HaTzirif of Eisias and Koyach HaTzirif of Eseroides. In Tanya, it's Koyach HaTzirif of Eisias. In this Perek, it's Koyach HaTzirif of Eseroides, which I'm saying is a lower Madrega. But he says in this Koyach HaTzirif itself, there's 2 Madregas. One is going to be called Yechida, and the other one is going to be called Chaya. The one that's called Yechida has to do with Keach Elyon, and one that's called Chaya or Makif is called Chayas Klali, which is the last 2 lines of the Perek. And if you look before on page Nun Vav, he tries to articulate these 2 aspects of Keach HaTzirif. So here's how I want you to understand it. This is the pshat. There's 3 madregas of Ein Seif, right? There's the Mokar of Mamala Kalaman, Gili La'atzma B'Shvila Elamis, which we call Mokar HaKav. And in this Maimer, it's the idea of Esesfiris in it, right? Then there's the Ein Seif, which is Gili La'atzma B'Shvila La'atzma, which is the Mokar of Seif of Kalama, which is called Sfiris Ein Kates. This Madrege, compared to Ein HaKav, is like Seif, like Makif. And then you have the idea that even in Etzem of Ein Seif, you also have Sfiris, because of the principle of Pnimi and B'Etzem. Etzem of Ein Seif, relative to Esesfiras Hagenuz, is like Yechida. So if you have 3 levels in Ein Seif, Etzem of Ein Seif is like Yechida, Seif of Kalal means Oyer, and this Kol Batzmusa is like Chaya, and the Esesfiras Hagenuz, where the Kol of Natzimtzum are like Naran. So there's 2 aspects in Koyach HaTzirif itself, that when all 10 Sfiras come out together. So there's a Koyach HaTzirif. In other words, there's a great chokhmah, a great oyer, which is the reason why the Esses Sfiras emerge the way they emerge. And we have no idea what that chokhmah is, because we don't even know what the Esses Sfiras look like. But the Rebbe says, whether you know it or not, it's there. There's 2 pratim to the Keach HaTzirif. The lower aspect of the Keach HaTzirif, which comes from the Ein Seif, which is Gilui. Seif of Kalama, but Makiv. And the higher Madreg of Keach HaTzirif is called the Atzmas of Ein Seif. If you look in the language, look in the Maimon, you'll see. Last 2 lines on the first paragraph, page Nun Vav Yeshlema. Keach Elyon, the expression Keach HaTzirif, which is the higher Keach, is Keach Nelem, is a Keach which is hidden b'yetzim. Now, Beklal, Keach Nelem goes on Malchus, Keach Nelem goes on Oisias. We're using Keach Nelem on Oyer. But what Madrega ver Ha'atzmi shel Pnimi. You see those words? The way Pnimi gets instead of Atzmas. Pnimi is Gilui. Pnimi is not only Gilui, Pnimi is Gili and Kalim. What's the Atzmi of Pnimi? The fact that the Eibush has a kavanah there should be in Pnimi. And therefore the Madrega of Etzem of Ein Seif, which is Leinoga Be'etzim Some Klal, there's already a vinyan of Pnimi Be'etzem Esesfiras Hagnuzis. And that idea that you have Esesfiras and Atzmas of Eir is called Eira Eil Al Kulona. It gives the Yechida to the Tzirof of Esesfiras Hagnuzis. And then he says, V'chayis kloli, hu eira mizgala. Chayis kloli means light which is revealed. But it's revealed on a level of klal. In other words, makif. And that's al derech mashal as a sfira St. Kate's, the middle madrege. V'yesh loim asher zehu yechida v'chaya. The keach hatziruf, which is how the sfiras hagenuzos emerge from Atzmas Ein Seif, as a singularity, as a oneness, has 2 levels. The higher level of Achei Temimim is the etzem of the pnimi, which is like Yechida. And the lower level of Achei Temimim is like a chayis klali. It's an makif, like Seviv Kalam. That affects that when esesfiras agnuzas emerge, they emerge together. Now we don't know what the esesfiras agnuzas are. We have no idea how the esesfiras agnuzas emerge together. We certainly have no idea what that keach hatziruf is that causes esesfiras agnuzas to emerge together the way they emerge. And now we're learning that in this itself, there's two madregas. Verstehst? So we understand very little. We understand very little. The takeaway is that just like Tzimtzum Arishin causes each one as a spheres to come out by itself, so the oil which exists when all the 10 spheres are together is lost. And the oil which is connected to Kavanah is lost. The oil which is connected to the Tziruf that made the Esespheres emerge the way they emerge is also lost. In both its beginners. So although the difference between Esespheres after the Tzimtzum and the Esespheres Agnudus Lifnei Tzimtzum is not considered Hischach, it's only called Gilui Hahelem and Miyut, we have 3 or 4 aspects of Tzimtzum. That's what we are learning. Who cares? The Rebbe Rashab does. I can't say I do, but he does. Okay, questions or comments?
The difference that you're making between Tanya and Amaima, it makes more sense by Tanya that it brings it's an Earl al Kulana, such a Lashon Achayis Kolos, because they are mamish dealing with the Oasis themselves. But here it seems that this is like a Koyach Hatziluf, which is dealing sort of with the Chachma as well. It seems to be. It doesn't. I don't understand why it's being called Earl al Kulana.
It's called Keich HaTziruf. It's called Keich HaTziruf. And this Keich HaTziruf has 2 labels. Eir El Kolana is the deeper label. And Chayis Klali is the more revealed label. The reason we're calling it by these names is because it's Milmaila Lamata. It's not like first you have spheres that are separate and then you're joining them. Okay. First you have a joined system of SS spheres and they're being separated. But the joined system SS spheres have a joiner. They are SS spheres. And that joiner existed before the 10 spheres had the potential of being separated spheres. And it's the reason SS spheres emerge together the way they do. So in relationship to the SS spheres that are going to be separated, in relationship to the SS spheres, where the spheres are 10 separate spheres, it's a Eirei Al Kulana. It's a Chayis Klali.
But by the Oisius and Tevas, L'chor is the opposite. L'chor, first you have Oisius, and then you have the Koyach HaMatzayif, which makes the Tevas, and that's what creates things. That's not Salam Amaris.
Okay, so now wait, let's... if you remember Perek Chof Gimel, about Baruch, Perek Chof Dalet, about Baruch, right? What did he say? First you have the word Baruch, then you... So, even by Oisius, I don't know. Your question is well taken. But you could only say that about Oisius. We're not going to say that about Ois. You could say about Oisius, they're separate and then they're joined. Fine. Machon and Oir, first they're one and then they're many. For sure.
Are you saying that according to Perikov Gimel that the Tevas actually came first, so to speak? That's Tanya Kadisha, that's the whole word. That's why you teach your kid, because really the Tevas are before the Oisius.
I gave you shiurim on it. I don't know if you were there, but we talked about it. We Farbrengen about it. Because it's really more a Farbrengen than a Haskalah. But yeah, that's how the Rebbe said it, even about words. But about words you can argue. You could say name. Friege van Oisius, the Nocher van een Werte, noch van andere geteld. But about Oides, for sure it's that way. Okay, listen, Chavra, I want to make a request. The next shit is Monday next, huh? At least Chazer Chavov. And you want to be a tzaddik gomer, she'ein l'mayla imenu, prepare Chavzayin also. I love giving a shir, and I'm so happy that you're here. But it will be shalei be'erech more if you would chazer and prepare.
How much are you doing in the next?
Huh?
How much are you doing in the next class of Zion?
So that was Chavav. I'm done with Chavav. I don't need any more Shurim on Chavav. It's very hard to say. I don't know. I prepared it once, but I'm not prepared to give a shiur on it. So you know how it works. You prepare, you think you know what you're going to say, then when it comes L'Poil, it comes out different. At least 2 shiurim, possibly 3. Okay, but to learn the Pedic, Chavav, and A, see what I told you is written here, or B, come along and say that I'm beating a kettle, I made up a whole pshat, it's not written in the Maimed. Other. Both of them would be good options. I'd love to hear your days. It's very cute. I had last night in my house, Ayid. He's a Satmar Chassid who's learning Chassidus Chabad, and he listens to my classes. So he says to me, Die weiß, die ist sich auch getauscht. He tells me, you changed. When you were younger, you were so nasty and angry. Now you're so sweet. I said to my friend, you're listening to my morning shurim. Listen to my shurim at night. You'll see I'm the same old angry guy that I was 20 years ago. Depends on my crowd. Verstehst? Wenn sich auf Neulam. Anyway, you're my... Mitach kemen red with this Maisa is. I'm so happy that you're here. Really, I appreciate it. There's no question about it. Okay, if you guys are good, we'll end the shiur and we'll start this on Monday.